Hello and welcome to Tattoos of the Unidentified. It's Season 1, Episode 4. Something truly amazing has happened. A teenage girl that was unidentified for 35 years has recently had her identity confirmed. And the man that gave her back her identity is Carl Koppelman, and he's on the podcast tonight. Hello, Carl, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, glad to be here today.
So how did you get interested in this case?
Well, for the past about 5 years or so, I've been a moderator on the web sleuths crime uh, crime solving community. Web sleuths is a website that deals with unsolved mysteries and um, various crime stories that are in the news. And there's also a forum that involves missing persons and unidentified decedents. And in that forum, the members all pool their efforts together to try to resolve these unidentified decedent cases and try to see if they can locate the missing persons that match those cases. In the course of that, there was one case called of a young girl in upstate New York, the western side of New York, who was referred to as Caledonia Jane Doe. And for 35 years, Caledonia Jane Doe was a young girl who was estimated to have been about 15 or 16 years old, who was murdered and left in a cornfield on the side of the road. And for 35 years, the local authorities were unable to figure out who she was or who killed her. But just this week, we just learned that, they now know that the girl's name is Tammy Jo Alexander of Brooksville, Florida, 16 years old.
And you're the one that identified her, and which is just completely amazing. So, what was it like to see the face of the person that you had been searching for like years?
Well, it was a shock. This occurred back in September of last year. I was going through my normal routine of going through trying to pull up the new listings of missing persons, and I pulled the list from the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, and I came across this case of she was listed as 13 years old and missing in 1977, which ended up being incorrect information, but I saw this case file and took a look at it, and it immediately there was a recognition that, hey, this is the Caledonia Jane Doe girl. I recognized her pretty instantly, and it was pretty exciting to see that face of a person who up until then I had only seen coroner photos, and seeing this lifeless face, and then to see this girl's face alive was quite a shock, and it was exciting at the same time. But I've described to other people, I've said it was almost like seeing a ghost, because it's such a shock to see somebody alive that prior to that you'd only seen dead.
So once the police confirmed that it was Tammy Jo, what were you able to find out about, what happened to her, why she wasn't identified before, what her life had been like?
Well, I guess Tammy had lived a pretty turbulent childhood. She was living with her mother and her stepfather in Brooksville, Florida, and her mother and stepfather ran a truck stop. She had worked as a waitress at the truck stop, and she had run away from home on numerous occasions, and was returned home. Several times she'd run away, and at one point she actually went as far as California with a friend of hers from high school, and um, was flown back home by the friend's parents. Interestingly enough, the friend later described the incident and said that when they got to Arizona, the friend's mother was willing to pay airfare for him to come back, but Tammy's mother just said, leave her there. I'm not going to pay for her airfare. So the friend's mother ended up having to pay their airfare to get back to back to Florida from Arizona. And uh, so we found out that in late 1979, uh, Tammy left again and was never seen after that. For 35 years, she uh, there was no sign of her, and her family had just presumed that she'd run away from home and started a new life, and that was the end of that. So um, there was no indication that anybody had been looking for her, or even that the Hernando County Sheriff's Department was aware of her existence after that point.
So how did a missing person report finally get filed?
Well, the same friend who went to California with her, uh, had moved out of town after their sophomore year in high school. This friend, and well, along with her family, they moved out of town. I believe they went to either New Mexico or Arizona, but she had lost touch. She knew that Tammy had run away on several occasions, but they completely lost contact with each other. And so 35 years later, she started looking around, trying to Googling or using Google and trying to find out, maybe if she could make contact with her friend again. Uh, in Googling her name, she ran across a posting on the Zaba search site. It was a posting made by Tammy's boyfriend back then. Uh, and he was saying that she had not been seen since 1979. So Tammy's friend was kind of shocked by that, and she made contact with the boyfriend, and the boyfriend put her in touch with Tammy's sister, and from that point, the friend contacted the Hernando County Sheriff's Department and asked them what kind of information they had on her missing persons case. Well, the Hernando County Sheriff's Department had never heard of Tammy Jo Alexander. They were very interested in that in this new name that they'd never heard of, because they had a couple of unidentified females whom they were trying to identify also as and they thought maybe Tammy Jo was one of those two. But so they were interested, and they completed a missing persons report 35 years late. And once that missing persons report hit NamUs, then I spotted it and recognized her as the Caledonia Jane Doe.
Uh, so how many have you solved any other cases?
Yes, there were. This is the fourth unidentified decedent case that I've matched up to a missing person case. Uh, there was actually another case where I located the missing person alive, and it was a woman who had walked out of her life back in 1976. Police in Northern California had presumed that she'd been murdered. I was, through a little research, was able to find her marriage record, that she had been married and that she was living in Salt Lake City, Utah. And so I found her telephone number and her address and called up the sheriff's department in Butte County, California, and said, "You want to talk to this girl who you think has been murdered? Here's her telephone number and here's her address. Give her a call. You can clear your case." So they were glad to have that case off of their books. But there was also three other unidentified cases that I had, which I mentioned, and then there's also a young man, a U.S. Marine, who went on the People Seeking People page, and he was adopted, and he was trying to locate his birth mother. And he gave a brief description of his, he had a few little details about who, his birth mother's first name was Robin, and that he knew she was a swimmer in high school, and he had a few other details, and that he knew he was born in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So given that information, I started going through high school yearbooks, and I found a girl named Robin who was on the swimming team, and she was the right age. Her name was spelled Robyn, not Robin. So, um, I gave that information to him, and he came back to me later and said, "Yep, you're right. That's her. That's my mother." So that was exciting to see. Uh,
Amazing.
to see the man reunited, and as a U.S. Marine who was, I'm sure he was happy to be able to tell his birth mother, or happy for his birth mother to know what had become of, that
Yeah.
he made something of himself and, served his country honorably.
So you
But
have,
then,
oh, sorry.
oh, go,
So you
oh,
have all these solved cases. Uh, what other kind of cases are you working on right now?
well, there's two cases that are of particular interest to me. They're also involving young girls or women that were murdered and left naked on the side of the road. There's one case very similar to the Caledonia Jane Doe case, except for that Callie was not sexually assaulted. But there's a girl in Walker County, Texas, back on Halloween night 1980. They refer to her only as Walker County Jane Doe. And Walker County Jane Doe was a young girl, probably about the same age as Tammy when she died, uh, about 15, 16 years old, uh, was seen at a truck stop uh, asking directions to the men's prison in Huntsville, Texas. So for some reason, she wanted to visit that prison, apparently to visit somebody there. But um, the the waitress at the time had noted, I recognized that she was a minor, obviously under 18, and said, do your parents know where you are? And she said, who cares? As if, she, she didn't care whether her parents knew where she was. So the following morning, she was found um, murdered, brutalized, raped, strangled, beaten, and naked on the side of the road. And for over 30 years, nobody's been able to figure out who she is or was. And then there's a second case that I'm quite interested in, a girl who's only referred to as Arroyo Grande Jane Doe, named Arroyo Grande for the boulevard on which she was found. It was Arroyo Grande Boulevard in Henderson, Nevada. She was another young woman, probably, I would guess, 18 years old, 19 years old, found again naked and beaten and stabbed several times, and left on the side of the road. Um, and this occurred in about October of 1980, and so for over 30 years, she's also remained unidentified. And those are two cases that I'm quite interested in, and then also would like to see solved now that Caledonia Jane Doe case is now resolved. These are my next two projects, or next two desires, is to see those two girls get names.
That would just be amazing if they could be found also.
Yeah.
It has been beyond fascinating to have you on today. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. See you later.
Have a
Bye.
good day.
I'd like to say thank you to Maria for researching this case. If you like this podcast, you might consider liking us on Facebook. The Facebook page is www.facebook.com/tattoos of the unidentified. We also have a Twitter page, www.twitter.com/tattoos of UID.